Good evening, everyone from London, and good afternoon, good morning to you all, over 500 participants from around the world. Thank you for tuning in to this special audience with the First Lady of the State of Israel, Mrs. Michal Herzog, who will be speaking on Israel's mental health predicament post-October the 7th. My name is Sandra Dangor, a member of the Israel Bonds UK Women's Division Council. The State of Israel Bonds has been around since 1951 and is an important tool for the State of Israel to keep in touch with the diaspora. For more information, details are scrolling below. I am also a board member of the British Friends of the Herzog Medical Centre, which seeks to raise awareness of the medical facilities and now, especially, of the mental health and trauma facilities. Dr. Kane will speak more about this later. I would like to thank my fellow board members of the British Friends and to all our Herzog, Metiv, Peace of Mind host families from across the UK and beyond, who host the IDF veterans and reservists as part of their psychotherapy and rehabilitation programme. This is a joint venture event this evening between the State of Israel Bonds and the Herzog Medical Centre as a show of our mutual love for the country of Israel. I will now hand over to Dr. Ezekiel Kane, President of Herzog Medical Centre, who will introduce our speaker and share some more background on the mission of the centre. Over to you, Dr. Kane.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Shalom, good morning or afternoon and evening to you all from across the globe, and thank you for joining us at this special event. We're very grateful for the joint efforts of the UK office of the Israel Bonds and the British Friends of the Herzog Hospital, and especially grateful to our special guest, Mrs. Michal Herzog, the First Lady of the State of Israel. I'm Dr. Kane, the President of the Herzog Hospital in Jerusalem. As the world awoke to the horrors of the 7th of October, the State of Israel found itself plunged into an exceptional situation. The suddenness, the ferocity, the cruelty of the massacre are with no parallel in the history of the modern State of Israel and, probably, in the history of the Western world since the end of the Second World War. Despite the experience of Israel in wars and conflict, this situation has given rise to stress, trauma, anxiety, and depression on an unprecedented level. The Herzog Medical Centre has been involved in mental health since its founding as Ezrat Nashim 130 years ago. Established as the first centre in the land of Israel for mental health in the late 1800s, it continues to be highly involved in the care of those needing support and treatment for mental health challenges. Now named for the late Rabbanit Sarah Herzog, the mother of the late President Chaim Herzog and the grandmother of our President Yitzhak Herzog, both presidents of the state at critical junctures. The Rabbanit Herzog led the hospital from the mid-1940s until her passing in 1979. She set the tone for the compassion of the charitable institution that the hospital has become. Today, with close to 600 beds, it's a major center dealing, in addition to mental health, with the fields of geriatrics, rehabilitation, and it's also Israel's major center for chronic respiratory care with some 250 beds. The hospital relies primarily on charitable support for its capital and for special services. The mental health clinics play a central role in dealing with the aftermath of the ongoing conflict. A specialized clinic for the 18 to 25 years old is now dealing with large numbers of the music festival survivors. That is what is known as the Nova Festival. Metiv, the Center for Psychotrauma, which Sandra mentioned, is, in addition to its clinical work, running courses training therapists in the field and has trained over 3,000 since the outbreak of the war. An additional clinic in collaboration with the Ministry of Defense deals with security forces, and all this is in addition to the regular works of the clinics. With the events of October the 7th, the President and our guest, Mrs. Herzog, found themselves thrust into a position of leadership for which they are, I can say, uniquely qualified. Mrs. Michal Herzog is certainly the right person at the right time. Trained as a lawyer and with a specialty in mediation, she spent the years prior to becoming the First Lady involved in directing philanthropic foundations, active in social fields such as health, education, and civil society. She was engaged in projects of scientific research, social welfare, empowerment of special populations, and the creation of pathways for their employment. Since becoming the First Lady, she has been active in the field of mental health, fighting stigmas and promoting open discussion about mental health, particularly in the wake of COVID and its ramifications upon the children and the youth and the society of Israel. Thus, Mrs. Herzog is eminently qualified to take a leading role in the current crisis, and we are very grateful to you, Ms. Herzog, that you've agreed to appear before us today. Please, over to you, Mrs. Herzog.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. It is, thank you for your kind introduction, and I'm very pleased to be here with you, friends from all over the world. Unfortunately, I was not privileged to know the Rabbanit Sarah Herzog personally, as I entered the Herzog family only a few years after her passing. But I admire her deeds, and of course, I'm very proud of the association of our family with the Herzog Hospital, especially in recent years, as you mentioned, Dr. Kane, in my position as director of a philanthropic foundation that was very active in Israel. For those of you from the UK, you probably know the Wall Foundation that works in London, and I was privileged to be their director in Israel for 13 years. And thus, I was associated and was happy to help in many ways the growing Herzog Hospital, which has become a very, very important institution. And as you know, we are in very difficult days since October 7th, which has caught all of us unprepared. Israel is still in trauma, and we do not want to reach the post-trauma, and we want to prevent that as much as possible. And mental health is going to become the issue that we will deal with, and one of the greatest challenges of the state of Israel in many, many ways. We're talking about the displaced families from the south and from the north. We're talking about bereaved families. We're talking about the fighters that are coming home after long stays in Gaza and on the northern border. And in that respect, helping the displaced families immediately after the October 7th Black Sabbath, as we call it. I know that Herzog Hospital was one of the first ones to come to the help of the families which were moved to hotels around the country. And I must tell you, one of the things that we saw was the strength of communities. And so the kibbutzim, which were hurt so much, all the southern kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip, which were attacked and lost so many members, both those that were hurt and killed and murdered, and those that were kidnapped. The kibbutzim were still stayed as communities, and the strength of the community was very apparent. Whereas the displaced families from the towns, such as Derot from the south, or Ashkelon, or Kiryat Shmona from the north, found themselves in very dire situations. I can tell you that, for instance, the citizens of Kiryat Shmona, not a very big city, but they were spread in 100 hotels all over Israel, which is a very difficult situation, because when you're not part of a close-knit community like a kibbutz, and you find yourself on your own, or maybe with a few families that you know, this affects, of course, the entire psyche of the family, especially, and the weaker link in all of this situation are the youth. And I find that very disturbing, and I think a lot of the attention has to be paid to the well-being and mental health of the youth, who have already come out affected from the COVID years and are now facing another crisis in their lives. This is a very, very difficult situation. And I know that the quick intervention of such non-governmental entities, such as Herzog Hospital, coming to the help of such displaced families, was crucial in the first days to bring them back to some sort of routine, to get some help, both in the mental field and ongoing, to get some sort of routine for the kids, and of course for the grown-ups as well, who were torn from their homes. And this is something we have to deal with. Another aspect is the reservists and fighters that come back. And I, a few weeks ago, initiated a conference at the president's residence about the issue of coming home. Mostly the reservists who were in Gaza for 2, 3, 4, some of them almost 5 months, and had to come back home, found this not to be an easy matter. Of course, there is much more understanding these days, both from the army and the Ministry of Defense, who understand that they have to help the fighters who come home after such long and very focused fighting. They need the envelope, they need the help. And I know that Herzog Hospital is also very active in that respect. So, as I said in the conference, we approached 3 main areas: coming home to the family, of course, the family, the kids who were worried, the mothers who were worried but had to hold strong and developed a routine without the father. By the way, we also have women reservists, so it works both ways. So that was about coming home and understanding that family life has to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, and it has to take its time. Another aspect, of course, was getting back to the workplace. The workplace, you know, imagine you're away from your workplace for 3 months, 4 months. Life goes on, work goes on, people around you continue, they move on, and you're left behind. And when you do come back from the fighting, it's very difficult. The adjustment is not easy, and many of the relatively young people that come back to work find it very difficult to concentrate again. And another issue were the students coming back to the institutions of higher education. I can tell you on a personal note, from my own son, who was in Gaza for 120 days, coming home and going back to school, back to university, was not an easy matter. Concentrating, Everything seems less important, of course, after you were focused on fighting. The adrenaline was there. You were with your team. You were very, very mission-oriented. And all of a sudden, you come back home, and the banality of regular life is not easy to absorb. So, as I said, the Army is much more aware of it. You know, a few months ago, in September, beginning of October, we were marking 50 years to the Yom Kippur, to the 1973 war. And I was talking to many people. We attended many ceremonies, the president and I, paying respect to the fighters from 50 years ago. And they were all saying, you know, many of them understood they were post-traumatic many, many years afterwards, because there was no understanding at the time. So I'm glad there is an understanding now, and most of the fighters undergo a few days of what we call processing before going back, of speaking to social workers, to psychologists. This is a very, very important step in going back to routine life. And the envelope around the people coming back has to be offered in many, many ways to help them get back and speak out. For many of them, it is not an easy matter. And what I try to also, in our meetings with many of them, what I try to say is that they should not shy away from asking for help. It is not always easy. It is not always easily available, but it is something that needs to be done, and the families and people around them also have to notice if they see strange behavior, difficulties in coming back to normal, regular lifestyle. And so this is a very important matter, and this is these programs dealing with the fighters coming back are super important. So I thank Herzog Hospital for dealing with that aspect as well. And another thing I wanted to talk about were the teams themselves, the teams that deal with the first responders, the staff in hospitals. They also need a lot of help. You know, just before the war, we were all helping the Ukrainian people. And I even had Mrs. Zelensky, with whom I have forged a real friendship. And many places in Israel, because of the knowledge that was acquired over the years in Israel, dealing with post-traumatic kids, with families, we were trying to help very much the Ukrainians. So we had programs of what we call train the trainers, so that they got the training in Israel, or Israeli professionals went to Ukraine to help train the professionals on the ground there. At some point, it was said that the most spoken language after Ukrainian and Russian on the borders was Hebrew, because there were so many volunteers. And we were trying to help them as much as we could. And so, reality brings situations we do not expect. And here we are also helping our helpers. And this is very important, as we need to help the first responders, the nurses, the doctors themselves, people that deal with the atrocities themselves, with the wounded, with the bereaved families. they also need help. So help the helpers is a very, very important issue as well. And as I mentioned, my friendship with Mrs. Zelensky, she called me a few days after the war started, and she actually caught me in Barzilai Hospital in Ashkelon, visiting the wounded. And as we were speaking, the siren went off, and I told her, Olena, I'm sorry, the siren is, I have to stop the conversation. And she said, if there's anyone who understands you, it's me. So reality is sometimes something stronger than what we expect or imagine it to be. And so, it is a long time now. I'm not sure we know exactly when things will get better. But if there's something that we all hope for and pray for, is bringing back the hostages. Just this afternoon, we had very interesting meeting here at the president's home before Ta'anit Esther, the fast tomorrow before Purim. We spoke about the heroism of women, of Esther, and of women as is shown since October 7th in Israeli reality under harsh situation. But we saw Israeli women as real heroines, both fighting and keeping their families together and keeping civil society and NGOs and real leadership is shown here. So I wish and pray, I'm sure with all of you, that the hostages will be brought back as soon as possible. And this, I'm sure, will also help the national psyche, the psychological situation of Israel at large. So I thank you very much for all your help, few friends from around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Herzog. I hope that you have time for a couple of questions. That's okay?
Of course, Sandra, thank you.
Thank you. But for the sake of continuity, I'll ask them, if that's okay.
Of course.
So we have one question from Gillian Perry. She says, today we've teamed up with Israel Bond's Women's Division. We felt it was especially apt given the hospital's namesake and the president's grandmother, Sarah Herzog. You have spent many years leading women's philanthropy. How does the current situation impact women, and what role can women play today?
So as I was saying, we have seen women since October 7th in every front, both fighting as tank fighters, as pilots. We've seen them on all fronts. We have seen them on the home fronts, leading NGOs, leading Israeli civil society, and really seeing women keeping the sanity of this country. And one of the fronts that Israeli women have been fighting over is the issue of the sexual violence, the horrible sexual violence that took place on October 7th, and unfortunately is probably taking place since, as we do still have many young women and men as well in captivity by Hamas in Gaza. And we don't know the situation, but we assume that it may be still going on. And I think if there is something that we all agree upon is that sexual violence, rape, should not be a weapon of war, should not be used as a tool of war. Unfortunately, the world, human rights organizations, women rights organizations were very slow to react, if at all. And the deafening silence we, as Jewish and Israeli women, felt, it felt like a real betrayal. I can tell you, I'm a lawyer by profession, and many of my colleagues who were experts in international law and over the years dedicated their work to protecting women's rights with international organizations felt a real personal betrayal when there was absolute silence or disbelief. And we know, especially in recent years, that the most important thing is to believe the survivors, to believe the victims. And so I must commend the Undersecretary of the UN, Mrs. Pramila Patten, who is the Special Undersecretary for Sexual Violence in Conflict Areas. She came to Israel in January with a very serious team. They were here over 2 weeks on the ground, fact studying. We gave them all the available information, and Mrs. Pramila Patten came with a very harsh report of Hamas's atrocities and sexual violence on October 7th and afterwards. And the discussion that was held just last week in the Security Council of the UN on that report was very difficult to hear because not all countries believed her, and she was under personal attack, unfortunately. But I think that the report brought a different stage to what the UN has considered until now. And it was very important for us as Israeli women to see that finally someone was listening to the truth and was taking a stand with us. And we should keep this topic as a priority, because I think we're not fighting only for Israeli women. This is a very turbulent world. As we speak, there are tens of violent conflicts around the world where sexual violence is being used. So we're fighting also for women who will be hurt in the next conflict. And this is a very important issue. And Israeli women are facing that. And as I said, are being the leaders in many, many ways. One thing that unfortunately I think we should improve at is, of course, having more and more women around the decision-making tables in Israeli society. And we should work very hard for that, because I think when you have more women around the decision-making tables, it will make Israel stronger.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and for opening our eyes to the horrors that are going on in Israel and in Gaza. The second question comes from Jonathan, and he's asking, looking to the future, what changes, improvements would you like to see in Israel's mental health care system? How can our viewers here tonight from around the world play a part? And lastly, are you hopeful for the future?
First of all, I'm an optimist. So, of course, I am hopeful. And I'm sure, you know, we see a lot of pain and agony. The president and I visit many bereaved families. And as I mentioned, the displaced communities and the wounded in hospitals. And so we see a lot of pain and agony, but we also see a lot of strength and resilience. But in order to help that and to increase the resilience of the Israeli people, we need many more professionals in the field of mental health and people that specialize in trauma, because not all psychologists or social workers, as wonderful as they may be, also understand the field of trauma. So I think there is a deep understanding, and I hope that the Ministry of Health in Israel will rise to the occasion and indeed support more and more training of professionals, especially dealing with trauma. And I'm sure that there is a lot to be done. And I'm sure that your viewers can also help with that. As I mentioned, mental health will be a major, major issue we will all have to deal with. And I think the understanding is growing. And you can see, as in Herzog Hospital, which took upon itself very, very a serious and leading role in this, and also in the training process of more and more staff and more professionals in the field. There is an understanding. I can tell you that just recently, the Jewish Federations of North America have decided to do a joint venture with the Israeli Ministry of Health and establish 12 new resilience centers around Israel. So I'm sure that from this crisis, there will also be an opportunity to talk above board about mental health issues, about well-being, because sometimes, and this is one of the reasons I took upon myself when my husband started his term as president, to speak about mental health, because one of my aims was to break the stigmas, to tell people to talk about it, to seek help, not to be ashamed of mental health issues and problems, because we're all, we're all affected, some more, some less, but we all have our own issues and we need help. So I think maybe this is an opportunity. From this great crisis, there is also an opportunity to bring this issue above board, to make it a very, very central issue in Israeli society. And I'm sure that with the help of all your viewers and the wonderful friends around the world, we can bring more funds into the system and create more opportunities, more training, more professionals that will deal with the matter. And as I said, I'm always hopeful. I'm sure that Israel will become even stronger, and we will emerge from this crisis much, much stronger and in solidarity, and we will continue to go from strength to strength.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you for such an insightful, emotional talk to show us all what there is out there and what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I will now hand over to Laura Orsi to give the vote of thanks. Laura is the chair of the Women International Division of Israel Bonds. Laura, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you. Yes, hello, everyone. My name is Laura Orsi, and I'm the chair of Israel Bonds International Women's Division, and I'm also a board member. On behalf of everyone at Israel Bonds and at Herzog Medical Center, Madam First Lady, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your support, your leadership, and your hard work, which you so generously give to the State of Israel. You definitely don't have an easy role, but your dedication is so evident in your talk with us this evening. Thank you, too, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to all of us this evening. I had the privilege to hear you speak at the Jewish Funders Network, JFN, just 2 days ago. And there I heard more about your role and devotion to our homeland. And I realized how precious your time and your leadership is. For all of this, we are so appreciative. Coincidentally, hope was the theme of this conference. And tonight you spoke exactly about hope for us in Israel and all around the world. I'd also like to thank all of the participants at this event tonight. Both organizations are always so happy to bring interesting content to both our homes on Zoom or your local venues. Make sure to contact any of us. You will find the details of how to contact us scrolling on the ticker below, and please join our mailing list and be the first to hear about our next events. Thank you, everyone, and wishing you all a good night.